New jobs can open up a lot of doors and opportunities, especially when you're young. However, as author Rotsoil tells us, not all of them will turn out good, especially when asked the question, "Won't you grow with us?" This past winter, I got a job at a tree nursery. It was supposed to be a seasonal job, helping with Christmas trees. My parents wanted me to save up for college or teach me responsibility or something, but I just wanted to save up for the new Doom game. The trees were grown at the tree farm behind the shop. They would be planted somewhere on the farm and then rotated up closer to the shop when they were fully grown. The trees were already cut by the time they got to the shop, so my job was pretty simple. All I really had to do was wrap Christmas trees and then tie them to people's cars. When people bought trees, I had to help move other trees up and organize them, so we always had a full stock on display. It was a lot of physical work, dragging and lifting trees, but it wasn't all that bad. When it was slow, we spent a lot of time standing around or making wreaths. My parents came and bought our tree at the nursery, and of course it was embarrassing. "Oh, Elliot!" my mom cooed and gushed. "My baby's first job!" She squealed and made a scene. My face flushed red with embarrassment, and I could see some of my coworkers snickering at the scene my mom was making. My dad just grunted and looked like he'd rather be anywhere other than here. They ended up buying the biggest tree we had. The old lady down the street came and bought her Christmas tree here too. My mom dropped in at the Steinbergs a couple times a week to check on them. Miss Steinberg and her husband hobbled in, barely able to walk, and picked out a smaller tree. They wanted to put it up on a table so it would be easier for them to decorate. It seemed like my mom told everyone she knew that I was working here. It was embarrassing for me, but the nursery owner certainly didn't mind the extra sales. When I first arrived, the place seemed a little dumpy. The sign out front read, "Cloverdale Farms, Grow with Us," in faded red letters on top of chipped white paint. The parking lot was just an empty gravel lot. One of my coworkers told me the bank had foreclosed on the property and the owners had bought it at a real estate auction. They were hoping to revive the business. They'd only had it a year, but already they'd raked enough money in to turn it around. The sign was now freshly painted, and the parking lot had been paved with asphalt with crisp painted lines dividing up parking spaces. They'd also fixed the roof, which used to leak something awful whenever it rained. It looked like a completely different place. The owners themselves were all right, if a little weird. The husband didn't talk much, and the wife sometimes had long pauses when she talked. When they called me to tell me I got the job, no interview necessary, it was a very awkward conversation. Like they'd never hired anyone before. But I was the newest employee, and the youngest, so I often wondered if my coworkers had similar experiences with them. Their son worked here too. He was only a little older than me, so they paired us up for my first couple weeks, and he showed me around. He stared a lot, though, at what seemed like nothing. One time he excused himself, and after 45 minutes of standing there waiting for him to come back, I went looking for him. I found him in the mulch aisle. He was just standing there, staring at bags of mulch. Hey man, you okay?" I asked. The way he was staring made me pretty uncomfortable. As soon as I spoke, his body jolted, like my words had broken a spell he was under. He just grunted and nodded like nothing had happened. They're all a little weird, but they're nice enough, I guess. After I'd only worked there for a month, I noticed my pay was higher. When I asked about it, the wife looked at me like I had grown another head. Free money is free money, right? On Sundays, the nursery isn't open for a full day. About a month ago, they called a staff meeting after the store closed. When I asked what was going on, one of my coworkers said this was the first staff meeting they'd had and he was one of the first people hired. It was an awkward meeting. but that was no surprise. We all gathered around the register, with the owners behind the counter. Their son wasn't present, and the wife had a far-off look in her eyes. The husband was a man of few words, so the meeting was quick. They told us they were expanding. Sort of. Previously, the nursery was only open during Christmas tree season. But we had all done a great job selling trees this year, and they were expanding in a way. They were going to start selling seeds, flowers, and other plants through the rest of the year. They also said not all of the staff would be continuing with their new venture, and we would find out when we received our paychecks. After the meeting, they passed out paychecks. While everyone around me either sighed in relief or quietly slipped their paychecks in their pockets and left, I didn't really care either way. I mean, it was just a seasonal job and I was in high school. If I was let go, it was no biggie. But I wasn't. I was asked to stay on. "We hope you'll continue to grow with us," the note said. It was typed in red ink on a small white card, similar to the sign out front. My mom was ecstatic. She thought this meant I had done a great job, but to be honest, I didn't think I had. I didn't really do much at work. Only the wife worked the register, so I didn't interact with customers too much. And I was just a kid. My dad didn't really seem to care either way. But that's when things started to get weird. The next day, I went to work after school as normal. There wasn't much to do, so I just tidied up and swept the floor. I was back by the bags of mulch, sweeping up a bag that had split when one of the guys I worked with stormed in. He was yelling at the owners, asking how could he be let go. That he'd always been on time, always willing to help out. The owners just stared at him, but that's when he noticed me. He started asking how he could be let go, but they had kept me. Still, the owners just stared at him, and I pretended I hadn't noticed and went outside to help put some stands together. When I looked up, the wife was standing in the doorway, watching me. A couple days later, my former coworker was missing. He was last seen at a bar later that night, drinking himself silly. A lot of people speculated that he'd just skipped town, left to go find a new job. But why would he leave town for a new job that quickly? When I mentioned it to my mom, a weird look came over her face. "What is it?" I asked. My mom tried to brush it off, but she was a pretty bad liar. "Well, you know how I check up on the Steinbergs, right? Their kids are all grown and moved away, and they don't get many visitors." I nodded. My mom's parents were gone, so in a way I think she had filled the hole in her life with the Steinbergs. "Well, honey, the thing is..." My mom had been drying dishes and put the towel down. She struggled to look at me. Clearly, she was having a hard time talking about this. "Mom, what is it?" I asked. The way she reacted made me uneasy. Something wasn't right. "Well, Miss Steinberg is missing too," my mom said quietly. "What?" I asked. My mom nodded and bit her lip. "She went missing shortly after the New Year." "But that was months ago." She nodded again. "At first I didn't want to tell you because, she has dementia. They think she just wandered off and got lost somewhere. No one thought it was a big deal. We all thought the cops would find her and bring her home, but she hasn't come back yet. And now it's months later, and I just didn't know how to tell you." "How's Mr. Steinberg?" "He's beside himself," she sighed. "He let her go out one day and his knees were bothering him, so he didn't want to go with her. He blames himself. He says he never should have let her go alone, anywhere alone. He won't eat, he won't sleep, all he does is sit there and wait for her to come home." Unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Neither of us thought she was coming home. The next day, more missing persons reports cropped up. I went to school where rumors about missing people filled the halls, and then went to work. That day, I was supposed to put together a display shelf for seeds. Now that spring was coming, we were getting a lot of people in to prep their gardens. I was alone in the shop and had just finished organizing the seeds when the door opened and the bell that hung above it rang. I looked up and saw Craig and a couple of his friends. Craig went to my school and, for some reason, didn't like me very much. I had no idea why, I just tried to stay out of his way. "Ha! Look at the dork!" Craig sneered. "Look at his dumb apron!" Craig pointed and laughed at me and his friends followed suit. I didn't know what to say, so I just ignored them. "Hey! Loser! I'm a customer, aren't you going to help me?" Craig said in a mocking tone. I sighed internally. "What can I help you with?" I asked hesitantly. "I just wanted to let you know I'm taking a trip," Craig started, stepping closer to me. I was confused. Why was he telling me this? I was getting the feeling something wasn't right. It was too quiet in the store. The air was too still. Only when it was too late did I notice one of Craig's cronies wasn't standing behind him anymore. "And I'll see you next fall!" Craig cackled, reaching out and pushing me hard. The missing friend had crept behind me and was on his hands and knees. I lost my balance and crashed into the seed display. Craig and his friends howled with laughter as they turned. The bell jingled again as they left. I groaned and looked around me. Seed packets were scattered all over the floor around me. The shelf would need to be put back together, but I didn't think it was too broken. I gathered up all the seeds and put them in a basket while I got to work assembling the shelf again. It took an hour to get everything reassembled, and it was a little wobbly, but it would have to do. The bell jingled again and instinctively panic set in. But when I turned to see who it was just the owner's son. "You alright?" he asked. His voice was slow and deep. I nodded, trying to steady my rapid heartbeat. He stood there, just staring at me for a minute. "Come with me." I followed him outside to his rusty brown truck. He motioned for me to get in, and I did. "Need help with something?" I asked him, wondering where we were going. "Yeah, out in the farm," he said, starting the car. We drove in silence around the store and down to where the trees were growing. Already some trees were poking out of the ground, eager to grow big and full over the coming years. We drove out to where they had been planting the next batch of trees. The only light out there was from the truck's headlights. A deep hole had been dug, the dirt piled high next to it. There were a couple of shovels lying on the ground and a thin, young tree, its roots bundled in burlap. Something else laid next to the hole, too, wrapped in a blue tarp. We got out of the car and went over. I walked up to the edge of the hole and peered down. The hole seemed to stretch far too long for a small tree like this. I looked up in confusion. The owner's son just stood there, staring at me. I went over to the blue tarp. Dread filled me as I reached out with a trembling hand. Quickly, before I lost my nerve, I pulled back the tarp and gasped. Craig was wrapped in the tarp. What's going on? Why is Craig here? What happened to him? Bile rose in my throat. Something was very seriously wrong here. I started shaking and I thought my legs would give out under me. "Won't you grow with us?" he asked, staring intently at me. "What are you talking about?" I yelled at him. Fear was taking over and I couldn't think straight anymore. "I saw what happened. I was in the back stockroom. He's a bully. He's a bad person. But he won't be all bad. We can make him good. We can use him." I watched him pick up a shovel and walk over towards Craig. Desperation took over me and I ran. I ran back up towards the store and then past it. I didn't stop until I was down the street. When I called the police, the operator must have thought I was insane. The owners were arrested, and the store was shut down. Turns out, all the missing people weren't missing at all. They brought out cadaver dogs, which led them to numerous trees. As soon as the authorities dug into the ground, a rotten stench had filled the air. They had been buried under the trees to help fertilize them. The police found Craig right where I had left him, tied up in the tarp. He was still alive. He leaves me alone now at school. Everything was right where I had left it. The shovels, the hole, the tree. Even the truck was still there, its headlights still on. There's no trace of the owner's son. The police are still looking. There are no leads or clues where he might be. I know he's still out there, though. I also know I won't be working at a nursery again.